Close your eyes and picture a caveman. You probably heard a grunt, maybe a growl, something low and dumb and barely human. Now erase that because it is wrong. Your ancestors 100,000 years ago had the same vocal hardware you have right now, the same tongue muscles, the same larynx, the same tiny horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat that makes speech possible. They could physically produce every sound you are hearing in this sentence. But what they actually said, and whether they could think the way you are thinking right now, is a question that leads somewhere most people are not prepared to go. There is a bone in your throat that is not connected to any other bone in your body. It is called the hyoid. It floats between your chin and your voice box, anchored only by muscles and ligaments. And it is the structural foundation of human speech. Without it, your tongue cannot make the precise, rapid movements required to produce consonants. Your larynx cannot tense and relax fast enough to shape vowels. In 1989, archaeologists excavating Kebara Cave in Israel uncovered a 60,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton. Most Neanderthal remains are fragmentary, skull pieces, teeth, a femur here, a jawbone there, but the Kebara skeleton was nearly complete. And inside the throat, preserved for 60 millennia in the limestone sediment, was a hyoid bone. It was virtually identical to yours. That single bone, no bigger than a bottle cap, set off a debate that lasted decades. A Neanderthal with a modern hyoid meant a Neanderthal with the physical equipment for speech. And if Neanderthals could speak, the question was no longer, when did language begin? It was, how far back does it go? A geneticist named Simon Fisher had spent years studying a British family with a devastating pattern. Across 3 generations, roughly half the family members could not speak properly. They could understand language. They could think. But the fine motor control required to move the tongue and lips fast enough to form words was broken. In 2001, Fisher identified the gene responsible. He called it FOXP2. When it was damaged, speech collapsed. When it worked, it orchestrated the neural circuitry that turns thought into sound. In 2007, a team at the Max Planck Institute extracted DNA from Neanderthal bones and checked the FOXP2 gene. They found the same 2 mutations that separate modern human FOXP2 from the chimpanzee version. Neanderthals carried the exact same speech gene we carry. They had the bone. They had the gene. But the evidence did not stop there. In 2021, a paleoanthropologist named Mercedes Conde Valverde at the University of Alcalá in Spain spent years building 3D models of ancient ear structures from CT scans of fossilized skulls. She reconstructed the hearing range of Neanderthals and compared it to their ancestors from Atapuerca, who lived roughly 430,000 years ago. The Atapuerca hominins could hear a narrower range of frequencies than modern humans. But the Neanderthals had closed the gap. Their ears were tuned to the same frequency range as human speech. they were not just capable of producing sounds. Their ears had evolved specifically to listen for them. Think about what that means. 500,000 years ago, something was already being said. And ears were already reshaping themselves to hear it. But here is where it gets stranger. Philip Lieberman, a cognitive scientist at Brown University, spent over 3 decades studying the anatomy of ancient vocal tracts. He argued that while Neanderthals had the hardware for speech, their vocal tracts were shaped differently. Their larynx sat slightly higher. Their tongues had less room to move in the pharynx. This meant they could produce most consonants, but their vowel range was compressed. The full spread of sounds you make when you say e, ah, oo, the quantal vowels that give modern languages their clarity, those were likely flattened in Neanderthal speech. Narrower, more nasal, like speaking through a slightly shorter tube. Other researchers have pushed back on Lieberman. Computer simulations from a team in France showed that Neanderthal vocal tracts could produce more sounds than Lieberman claimed. The debate is not settled, but even the most conservative estimates agree on one thing. Neanderthals were not grunting. They were talking. Their speech may have sounded different from yours, but it was speech. Now go further back. Before words existed at all, before the first syllable was ever strung to the second, your ancestors were already communicating with their voices. Stephen Mithen, an archaeologist at the University of Reading, spent years arguing that the earliest form of vocal communication was not language. It was music. He called it Hmmmmm, an acronym for holistic, manipulative, multimodal, musical, and mimetic. A system of tones, rhythms, and emotional melodies that conveyed meaning without words. Mothers humming to infants. Groups chanting to coordinate movement. Emotional states broadcast through pitch and rhythm rather than vocabulary. Mithen argued that this proto-musical communication predated structured language by hundreds of thousands of years. Neanderthals, he claimed, were expert singers who never learned to talk. Modern humans split the system in two. We kept the music and added words on top. If he is right, the first sounds your species ever made were closer to a song than a sentence. But not every part of ancient sound has disappeared. In the Kalahari Desert and the surrounding regions of southern Africa, there are languages still spoken today that use a sound found almost nowhere else on Earth. Click consonants. A sharp burst of air released from different points inside the mouth. Dental clicks, lateral clicks, palatal clicks, each one requiring extraordinary precision from the tongue and palate. The people who speak these languages, the Khoisan, are among the oldest genetically distinct human populations on the planet. Their lineages split from the rest of humanity roughly 90,000 years ago, before the great migrations out of Africa, before the first humans ever reached Europe or Asia. Some linguists believe these click sounds are not an innovation. They are a survival. The oldest consonant system still in use. A living echo of the first sounds human mouths ever shaped into meaning. You cannot hear what your ancestors sounded like 100,000 years ago. No recording exists. No fossilized voice. But when a Khoisan speaker produces a dental click, a sharp, percussive snap between the tongue and the teeth, you may be hearing the closest living approximation of the very first human word. If modern humans, with fully developed language and a lifetime of verbal experience, only talk to themselves a quarter of the time, what was happening inside the skull of a human who had no language at all? What was it like to think before words existed? In 1976, a psychologist at Princeton named Julian Jaynes published a book with a title so strange, it almost guaranteed no one would take it seriously. The Origin of Consciousness, in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. His claim was extraordinary. He argued that human consciousness, the experience of having an inner narrator who comments on your life and deliberates about decisions, may only be about 3,000 years old. Jaynes pointed to the Iliad, composed around 1200 BCE. The warriors in Homer's epic never deliberate. Achilles does not weigh his options. He does not have an internal monologue where he considers whether to fight or retreat. Instead, a god appears and tells him what to do. Jaynes read this literally. He argued that the characters in the Iliad behaved the way they did because the people who wrote it experienced the world that way. Their own thoughts arrived as voices, and they attributed those voices to gods. His theory was controversial. It still is. Many cognitive scientists reject it, but no one has disproven it. And the core observation beneath it is one that neuroscience has only strengthened since. The inner voice you experience as the continuous soundtrack of your life is not some ancient birthright of the species. It is a product of language, culture, and neural development. It requires a symbolic system sophisticated enough to turn thought into internal dialogue. Your ancestors, 100,000 years ago, did not have that. They thought in images. They thought in patterns. They thought in the raw, unnarrated experience of being alive in a world they could see and feel and navigate with extraordinary skill, but could not describe to themselves in words. The outer voice came first. Hundreds of thousands of years of speaking out loud, singing, clicking, calling to each other across the savannah, telling stories around fires, building languages one generation at a time. And only after all of that, after the architecture of language had been built and rebuilt and passed down through thousands of generations, did the voice turn inward. The voice in your head is not the foundation of human thought. It is the roof, the last thing that was built. And it was built on top of a structure that took 100,000 years of external sound to construct. Right now, as you process this sentence, a voice inside your skull is converting these words into your own internal speech. It is commenting, reacting, forming opinions. You assume that voice has always been there, that it is the core of what makes you human, that every person who has ever lived experienced the same running narration you do. But for most of human history, the skull was quiet. Your ancestors could speak long before they could think in words. The voice you hear right now, the one you call you, may be one of the newest features your species ever developed. And if it was built by language and culture, then it is not fixed. It is not guaranteed. It is a technology. One that every generation inherits, maintains, and could, in theory, lose. They spoke out loud for 100,000 years before a single word was ever thought in silence. The voice in your head is not ancient. It is barely a beginning.